1 in 5 Americans suffer from chronic pain. Many are now using CBD for relief.
Activists are hoping pot could be legalized nationwide by the end of 2019.
When you look at premium cannabis, the Illinois House approved legalizing recreational marijuana.
Welcome to The Budding Report, a weekly show centered around all things cannabis. Please join us in welcoming our host, Charles Horton, and his co-host, Melissa Nasits, as they share the latest in cannabis news, conduct interviews with top leaders in the cannabis space, and promote some of the latest in science and innovation. And now to our host, Charles Horton.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Budding Report. I've been gone for 3 weeks, 2 weeks in Hawaii, and I happen to have scuba diving scheduled every day. And then last week we had ice storms here in Dallas, so haven't been on. But Melissa, I hear you did a fantastic job as always, being the voice in the studio.
Well, I had some big flip-flops to fill.
My flip-flops.
But, you know, it's lonely to be here by yourself. You don't have the give and take, and I know you know this as well. But you know, we had great guests, and of course, I have the co-hosts to always lean on. So I just pretty much kicked everything over to them when needed. So but it's really good to have you back.
Well, thank you very much for filling in with these big flip flops. Yeah, I didn't want to leave my Hawaii clothes away, and it was like 82 yesterday here in Dallas. But today, I think we've got colder. Some rain coming, a little cooler. Christian, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well. Good to see you back in studio. Weather's nice out here. Feel bad for you guys in Texas. Having gone through what you did.
Well, it's nice here in Texas now, but boy, do I have some water pipe problems to deal with. Chris, you lost some water in Austin, and you had to huddle up, so you got closer to your family.
That's right. We fortunately didn't lose any electricity, but starting Wednesday of the polar vortex, we lost all of our water. Fortunately, no pipes burst. I was out there with a hair dryer, heating up my outdoor pipes and stuff to make sure that didn't happen. But when we lost water, we realized like how valuable a resource it was. It became very similar to the movie Waterworld. And we had to go back out to Bastrop to hang out with my parents until it came back on in Austin. And everything's okay now, fortunately. And we survived the polar vortex, even got a little sledding in, things that you would never expect to do in Austin.
Well, it sounds like you took it in stride. I had house guests watching my house, thank God, because I had high-pressure water lines burst. But they were fast to fill up the tub, and they were scooping up water for the toilets and all. I tried to wait until meal times, and I was going out to eat anyway. So I didn't want to risk that stuff not going where it's supposed to go. Well, we have a great show to come back to today. Our news article is going to be very interesting. This is probably one of the most interesting articles I've seen, and that is how long, on a legal basis, for driving under the influence is THC going to remain in your system. That's going to be an interesting article. So we have our medical and our legal experts, and our guests both have a lot to say on the subject matter too. So our guests are Shelby Stanley, owner of Dandy LLC, and Brian Holler, managing consultant at Value Integrators. So let's get right to the news. Chris, do you want to take it over?
Absolutely, Charles. Thank you. Well, a few weeks, people know I'm a criminal defense attorney, and a few weeks ago on one of their shows, I think you or Melissa asked if I was if my business was going to suffer as a result of all this legalization of marijuana. Well, there is truly an uptick in driving while high. So any lesser business in terms of possession cases are now getting replaced by these driving while intoxicated based on marijuana offenses. So the article we read about this week was about the huge uptick in Arizona of DUIs with marijuana being the intoxicant as opposed to alcohol. It's becoming almost more common to arrest people for a drug than for alcohol. But there's a huge issue with this marijuana driving while impaired when it's marijuana, because marijuana itself is very difficult to test for in terms of whether you're intoxicated. It stays in your system for 30 days. You need a blood test to show how much of the active compound is there. And I think giving the example of alcohol is the best way to illustrate this. So a DWI in most states is defined as losing the normal use of your mental or physical faculties. And that doesn't matter if you're impaired by alcohol or any other drug. Now, with alcohol, though, they have an easier way to prove it. It's if you're 0.08 or higher. Now, how did they get to this 0.08? Well, they had a bunch of studies by the National Highway Transportation Safety Association, commonly called NHTSA, in a wet lab. Well, what's a wet lab? That's where you get people drunk, and at different levels of their intoxication, you test them on field sobriety tests. You see how they're doing. So they scientifically validated that 0.08 or higher makes most people lose their normal mental or physical faculties. There have been no such studies on cannabis. There has been no green lab to determine it. And the only state we know of that has a per se definition of being high, being too high to drive, is Colorado. And that was after a fiery debate. They came up with 5 nanograms of THC per milliliter of blood, but there's been no scientific study to substantiate that that amount would cause a person to lose their normal mental and physical faculties. And the problem in places like Arizona is they don't have a per se definition. They're arresting people for driving while under the influence of cannabis, and then they're just taking a blood test and saying you're positive for cannabis, and then we're going to present this to the jury and you can get convicted. And that scares a lot of people because cannabis stays in your system about 30 days. So it's very fraught with problems. These prosecutions, you're going to need to get a lawyer to dig in because you should not be pleading guilty to this unless they have better studies to show that an actually being having cannabis in your system can translate to intoxicants. But I'd like to ask Dr. Shaw now a little more about this definition and the problems with having a nanogram level as your per se definition of intoxication with relation to cannabis.
Certainly. Thanks, Chris. So this is a complicated discussion. First and foremost, as you pointed out, such data for alcohol was arrived at over decades and decades of compiling crash site data by the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration. Some key points that I can raise for the discussion as well as our listeners. The idea of the nanogram measurement is just the determination, the use of the concentration value. So whether you would have certain things that are measured in decigrams, this is nanograms because it's minute concentration in the blood. So evidence over time, much more kind of on the research epidemiological aspect of it, determined that smoking or blood concentrations of THC range between 2 to 5 nanograms being associated with substantial driving impairment. And they highlight particularly in occasional smokers. So I can go through some quick data. Experimental data has shown that drivers attempt to compensate by driving more slowly after smoking cannabis, but control deteriorates with increasing task complexity. Cannabis smoking increases lane weaving and impaired cognitive function. Critical tracking tasks, reaction times, and lane position variability all show cannabis-induced impairment. So despite some tolerance in frequent smokers, they add complex tasks will still show impairment. And then if we move up a bit to the article, I'm in agreement with what this individual said about there's no set level of nanograms of THC that's deemed, quote, impaired in the scientific community. And what I'd add to that is an occasional user, for example, may show significant impairment with the same THC concentration in the blood compared to a daily user who may not demonstrate any signs of impairment. And we've seen that to some degree in alcohol. The last thing I'd like to leave the group with is the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration actually issued a very detailed report to Congress in 2017 to discuss this. And I just want to summarize a brief point at the beginning because it's a 44-page report. But what they do say is the peak THC levels occur at the end of smoking or immediately after cessation, depending on the rate and duration of inhaling. THC levels drop rapidly after cessation of smoking. In contrast to alcohol, which is metabolized at a relatively steady rate, THC is metabolized at an exponentially declining rate, where the THC blood level first drops rapidly, followed by a slower decline as lower THC levels are reached. And within 30 minutes post-inhalation, the THC level has dropped to 80 to 90% of the peak level. After a few hours, only low or no THC can be detected in the blood. Very low THC levels may persist in the blood from a single administration for more than 6 hours. So,
really interesting because it makes sense because you're inhaling it. I mean, even with inhaled insulin, which as diabetic, I give myself shots, but the new inhaled insulin is so much faster acting because you're inhaling it through your lungs, so it's immediately through your system. So it seems like it seems almost impossible to be able to trace exactly how much you have in your system at that point, especially if it's metabolizing that quickly.
Well, I want to hear from our guests on this subject matter too. Let's go ladies first with Shelby.
Yeah, I mean, I was just looking into it just to be sure, but Nevada's following suit as Colorado is with the nanograms. And I gave an example earlier, or we were talking, here in Nevada, we had a woman who was impaired and actually was driving down the boulevard and decided she was going to go on the sidewalk on her journey. She was, again, extremely impaired, ended up harming a lot of people. It was a really big story here in Nevada. At the time, we had just opened up our cannabis facility, and it was one of the first testing cannabis facilities in Nevada. We opened in 2015. She sent us that report of the woman, what was actually in her system. Yes, it did show that there were cannabis levels in there, but everything else in there was the attributing factor to that. The barbiturates, the alcohol, everything else, right? So I think that it's really hard to determine what's in your system at the point of time when you're being pulled over. Situations I've had here in Nevada since we started our cannabis program is what they'll do if you're an agent of cultivation, production, or retail. They do take that into account. And I've had several people get the, similar to like a DUI, they would get a walking test, count backwards, whatever that protocol is. I'm not sure. And if passed, they would allow people to go with a ticket. You essentially still get a ticket for possession, misdemeanor, but you could drive away. Other situations are not the same here. And they've gotten people for what seems to be less than 5 nanograms. So I think what these two gentlemen are talking about is really going to be data driven, and that's going to be the most important, is how we collect all this data, because that's the other odd thing is everyone's endocannabinoid system is different. So how long is all 4 of us sit and smoke or ingest the same thing? How long is it going to stay in my system versus, Dr. Shaw's or Chris's, so that's another determining factor I always feel like we have to kind of think about when we're testing and collecting the data.
Well, Melissa was saying earlier that she can understand how you would go up on the sidewalks in Las Vegas. And I mean, she's done that and she hadn't even been high or drinking.
I'm just angry. I was angry.
I said I agreed with that, but I just avoided the strip. So that's how I got away with that. I'm having all the time.
Well, it sounds like to me, basically, you get a lawyer. Because it's so gray at this point. I think with a good legal representation, you could probably beat just about anything. That being said, if you can't afford a lawyer, well, you're screwed.
One will be appointed to you, and they will not work for you at all. Good luck. Brian, what's your take on this?
I'm in California, so gray area persists in abundance here with regards to this law. We know that it's illegal to drive under the influence, but to everybody's point here, when are you inebriated, on cannabis, and how does that change individually, right? So I guess, in my opinion, I just kind of go by, I don't drive right after I've consumed. So I don't think that it's, I think that's what most people are doing, but the law needs to be more clear. There's also a lot of technology, at least I know of one company called Impairment Science, and they have an app called Druid, which is available on all the app platforms. It's a way for you as an individual to test your level of inebriation with regards to cannabis. It does little tests, mental acuity, some motion stuff. I think something like that might end up being a way that we can bridge this gap and kind of do some gray area, but still, as everybody's pointing out, a lot to flush out.
That's a cool software. I think I want to invest in that if it's gonna work and be accurate. So when I'm in a state where it's legal to consume, I typically do it right before bed. To me, I find that it helps me sleep a lot. And so under my belief system, I thought next morning, like alcohol, next morning you're going to be awake and fine. But this article that we're reading, one person said 12 hours, one person said 24 hours, and then Chris, like you said, it can stay in your system 30 hours, and some of the police departments are just looking to see if it's there at all. What's your legal suggestions here, Chris, other than, of course, call a good, competent attorney?
Well, I mean, it is very problematic because it's different with everybody. I mean, some people might even be better drivers when they're using cannabis if they have a medical issue of anxiety or some type of pain. And that's never the case with alcohol. So I think we have to think about that too. It may just be different amounts of time. But my advice for people would be, refuse blood tests. Make them go get a warrant. Because if you agree to a blood test, they will get your blood and they will get a positive result. As you said, it could be in your system for up to 30 days. And if they're going to present to the jury, they were positive for marijuana, there's a lot of jurors out there that aren't going to understand that doesn't mean you're actually high just because a residual amount of it's in your system, a non-active compound is in your system. So my advice is refuse. I actually just say refuse those tests. If you don't feel comfortable getting out of your car and performing in front of a camera in a high pressure situation on tests that are designed to make you look bad. I mean, if you want somebody to look balanced, what do? Tell them to stand with their feet together or their feet apart. A normal person stands with their feet apart. They tell you to stand with your feet together. They tell you to stand in a really awkward position for a minute as they try to get you to look like you're off balance. If you step out of that position, they mark on their thing that you've lost your balance. So it's just so skewed. Why take those tests? Why do them if you're not confident? Because you're going to get arrested if you take those tests, and then you even if they don't get your blood, you look bad on camera, and they're going to have leverage on you. So I think the best cases is if you're not comfortable doing that, if you have any doubt, just say no and call an attorney afterward. You're going to have a much better case if they don't have video of you or your blood. And even if they get a search warrant for your blood, it's wonderful to let the 2 hours pass that it takes to get that search warrant. That's more helpful in alcohol cases, obviously, than the marijuana cases. But even based on what Dr. Shaw was saying with that active compound dipping so quickly, that time is on your side if you make them go get a warrant. So always make them go get a warrant and never make a police officer's job easy for them.
So, Chris, does this change state by state? I was in, Hawaii the last 3 weeks, and one of my guests got pulled over, failed the field sobriety test, was taken in, and then they're taking him to the hospital. And so I got busy Googling and trying to figure out what he should do and what the law was, and find him a local attorney. And what I learned was you can refuse the field sobriety test, but if you refuse the blood test, you're automatically guilty. They take your license instantly, and it's like you failed the blood test. So would you still recommend that, like with that rule in Hawaii?
Absolutely, because there's a distinction between this taking your license versus the criminal case. It's okay to get your license taken. You can always get an occupational one. That's an administrative penalty done usually by a Department of Public Service, a Department of Public Safety, a DMV. Those are administrative cases. Just take your license. They're trying to use that to make you give up your constitutional rights in a criminal context. They're trying to use this threat that they'll take your license away. So even though they're saying like you're guilty of not giving your blood, which you agreed to with your license, that doesn't mean you're guilty in a criminal context. So even though when you sign up for your license, you agree to take these tests, the fact that you don't do that has no impact on your criminal case other than the fact that they can introduce the fact that you refused at trial. Yeah, you'll lose your license, but everybody loses their license anyway because it's kangaroo court over there. I mean, they don't have administrative law is ridiculous. They just say, oh, the cop had probable cause, take your license for 90 days. They use that threat of taking your license to make you think you have to do things. You don't have to do anything.
No, and you can actually appeal that because it isn't part of the actual legal case. This recently came up, and I actually was speaking with another attorney about this, a friend again, and they refused it. So, the assumption was he was going to lose his license for the entire year. as long as you have a very small window, there's like a few weeks window you have where you can actually appeal it. Never lost his license.
Oh.
So, but again, he had an attorney who knew what to do. If you don't know that, you're going to assume that you can't refuse the test. So.
Well, Melissa, you've always been my hero because you're at our age, you're in tip-top shape and all. But when my friends started describing what these field sobriety test was, I think you do fantastic even in high heels.
I have passed a field sobriety in high heels, as a matter of fact, but.
I'm kind of afraid, even if I'm totally sober, if I go trying to do all that balancing everything, I'm going to fall on my butt. Well, we've been on this a long time. There's no real good answers. Christian, if you decide to do a study on when marijuana THC is too much and all, I'd love to be in that study. So let me know.
The green study.
We're gonna be right back after this commercial break with Shelby Stanley. See you right now. Back.
Coming to you after our hike that we finished. Buster exercises 3 miles. Today is a recovery day because he did 8-mile hike over the weekend, broken up into 2. But what I want to share with you is this company here called Simple Changes. I learned about them and I absolutely love the concept. It's wellness, community, and organization. So as you can see here, I love the wrapping. I love purple, and it comes with 3 products. So I've been trying them out. First, it's the hemp oil spray, then it's the hemp oil dropper, and the hemp oil balm. So I'll be trying all of these out. I've been exploring them, exploring the ingredients. I met with the team on Zoom. Really, really, really neat product. And I love the fact that they also want to incorporate healthy practices. So they come with a little journal and something about Simple Success Guide. So, Simple Changes.
Well, welcome back. We're excited to have Shelby Stanley in with Dandy LLC. She is the owner of that company. She comes from operations management with Digipath and has quite a pedigree herself. So we're very excited to learn a little bit more. She did start her own company, the Dandy LLC, in July of 2020, right in the middle of all of the COVID restrictions. She assists companies with advising, auditing, and cannabis inventory needs. She's the secretary-treasurer of the Chamber of Cannabis, started in October of 2020, and helped with the passage of questions to the 2016 initiative that legalized recreational cannabis. So, well, I just need to know what got you along this path, what brought you into the cannabis world in the first place. And welcome.
Yeah, so I've always been passionate about the plants. I say lovingly that we all come from the illegal market, but that's where most of us are getting our street cred from. So my mother's been an accountant for 25 years. She had a client who was begging her for some help with a project that he had started. He wasn't very specific on the project, and once he was, she was kind of hesitant in the cannabis space and me entering the cannabis space in Nevada because it was so new and everything that Nevada had gone through up until that point. We met at a cigar bar in Las Vegas. He hired me pretty much on the spot after he asked me if I had ever grown cannabis before, which I don't think any interview in my life ever had that. And I really, truly thought it was like a trick question. I'm like, oh, I don't know if this is the right answer. But again, hired me on the spot. I smoked my first cigar, drank a beer in celebration, and the following day, November 1st of 2014, I was handed a set of plans and a letter from the state of Nevada that said complete in 18 months and you will receive a medical marijuana testing facility license. So I took no time at all, and instead of taking the 18 months, I built out a fully functioning cannabis testing facility in about 6.5 months in Las Vegas. We were one of the first licenses, first testing facilities, and then the first licenses period. I think we were one of 5 to open up the entire industry in 2015. And so from there, it was kind of history. I stuck with Digipath up until, again, July of 2020, like you had mentioned. There was just, I think, some changes that were happening in the Nevada market. and within the company I was working with that I wasn't my happiest. So I took everything that I have learned over the past 6 years and really looked at the industry in Nevada and where things were lacking and where people needed help the most. And especially in the pandemic, most people were laying off their highest paid executives or their master growers, or they couldn't afford certain positions like that. So coming in as an advisor was almost helpful to some of these guys to survive and staying compliant and staying on track with their inventory and helping to broker any product or licenses itself. There's quite a few people in Nevada right now who thought this would be a much different market and they would be rolling around in money right now, and they're not, right? And then the pandemic hit, and so there's quite a few people currently that kind of want out of the Nevada market. So I'm helping to help those people expand out, get out, and get people in that are passionate about it, so that we can continue to grow the Nevada market and service all the potential tourists that will come back one day.
Well, Shelby, that's fantastic. I, like you, love the plant and love everything about it. And I've been following the industry. It's so exciting to be here in the United States during this time where it's becoming legal. But there certainly are things to improve. One of the ones that you were talking about involves people that are getting into the business. And I know, at least from really studying California, that it's generally the laws and how they tax and all of that that makes it pretty well unprofitable. I know I sat in a conference in California where they were talking about how there was more illegal marijuana sold than legal because you made so much more money out of it. So tell me about what you think needs to improve in the industry.
Yeah, I think we're really working on that here in Nevada. We've kind of fought off the illicit market twice now, I feel like, with first launching our medical program and then kind of turning around and having the recreational program pass. I feel like we were able to really minimize our illicit market, but recently with everything going on, I've seen an uptick in it for sure. And I think, when it comes to that, in Nevada, I'll speak just to what I know. It was the barrier to entry for license holders. I feel like if there were not necessarily saying we go in a situation where everybody can grow and does as much as you want, but in Nevada there was very limited licenses. It was limited entry barrier. There were barriers to entry in Nevada that made it very hard to even get a production, cultivation, or retail license. So I think that played a role in it, and I think that one of the biggest improvements that would help amongst United States would be lab standardization, and really starting there, because there's still people that are doing nefarious things in testing facilities, unfortunately, and that's a trickle effect, because there's growers and producers out there who really, really care about the data and who really, really care about the consumer. And so if they're unable to collect, proper data and accurate data from labs who are doing nefarious things, then it's hard on a grower or producer to constantly improve if they're not getting accurate data. So I would say lab standardization is one of my biggest bugaboos. And education. Education is really, to follow it just right up real quick, I mean, education leads to good legislation. As again, we're in legislation right now. I feel like it's a lot more of our gaming guys and a lot more of the legislators knew about the plant and all the different things that we're doing or have done. We're close to at UGPath, who I still consult with, close to 100,000 samples we've tested in 6 years. That is a lot of data, and we should be taking that data amongst the other 11 labs in Nevada and sitting around a table and compiling that data and comparing that data and seeing what we can do with it and start helping consumers better understand the product.
So Shelby, you obviously have such extensive knowledge of the cannabis industry and inventory needs. My question is based on your experience with all those inventories, I'm sure you've encountered basically every strain. Can you tell our audience which is your favorite?
Yeah, my favorite has always been Gorilla Glue. I'm like, most people would always laugh at me or like, oh, typical, whatever. But any glue strain, for some reason, I love that gassy taste. There's a group out here who actually received the actual cultivars from the glue gentleman. He just recently passed away, the owner of the glue strain. But there's a group in Nevada who possesses all of those cultivars. So it's really good for me because we have literally every type of glue strain I could imagine. So that's normally my fave. But I think what's most important to say to this is not just specific cultivars, but really paying attention to your certificate of analysis in any state or anywhere or anything you ingest, Delta 8, anything. Certificate of analysis and what you're putting into your body is very important, and you should always have that with any product I suggest.
And just to follow up with that, and I don't even know if this distinction is what you would use. Is that an indica or a sativa or a hybrid? The glue strains.
So that's a hard question for me to answer because if you want me to be scientifically correct, 80% of what we think is a sativa is actually an indica to for crossbreeding, and most growers just it's no offense to them, they just haven't properly gone through breeding and how to really salvage a sativa strain, right? You're already looking at degradation and cloning over time and things of that nature. But yeah, if unfortunately what you think most of the time is a sativa is most likely an indica or hybrid. So I don't like the sativa indica, but I do love a good couch lock. So I'll go that route.
So Shelby, what testing services does your company offer?
So DigiPath in the state of Nevada, they require, we go through them, cannabinoids. The state requires 4, we test for 10. They require 11 terpenes, we test for 19. We look for 23 pesticides. Our heavy metals, we look for 4, arsenic, mercury, cadmium, and I'm forgetting one. Sorry, it'll come to me. Then we do we have moisture content. If you are selling flour, it has to stay under 15% unless it is wet trim, which means chop the plant down and froze it, at which point we don't care about moisture content. And then our most extensive panel is going to be microbial. So we look for E. coli, salmonella, 4 species of aspergillus, coliform, total aerobic, total mold and then Afla-Okra and mycotoxins. And those are the toxins produced by fungi.
Well, Shelby, I'm really impressed with your success. I'm also impressed with you opening a business during the middle of COVID. So I thank you for being on and wish you the absolute best. We're going to go off and take a quick commercial break. You can find the information on our website, thebuddingreport.com, for any of the guests that have been on our show, their contact information. And in these days where we're not getting in person together to network and socialize, please give them a call. They want to hear from you. So again, check our website for that, and we'll be right back after this commercial message.
Hello. Here on my lunch run in the middle of the heat where I get my break really quick after training clients and leading some classes. I am taking my Simply Satisfy. It is 3 sprays, organic hemp. Next one is my Simply Start. You can take it twice a day or once a day. I already took one morning dose. I'm now taking my afternoon dose. One little yummy organic hemp. Check them out. Simply Generous. Helicopter. Alright, time to go train run down the hill. Bye-bye.
Well, that was great information we got from Shelby, but I'm excited to introduce our next guest. You've met him briefly during the news segment, but Brian Holler is with Value Integrators. He is the managing consultant. He is an advisor, educator, and strategist. So his life purpose is helping people see that they're much more powerful than they realize. I couldn't agree more. So what wonderful, wonderful motto. Tell me a little bit about yourself and what brought you to be in the cannabis world.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you guys having me on. I, like most people, I think, or a lot of people, I should say, was introduced to cannabis just through a friend's older brother. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. So enjoyed it recreationally, as a youngster, and then of course got into things that I was fortunate to have open-minded parents. They smoked, but they didn't do it in front of us, and we didn't talk about it, but they didn't also discourage me from it. So that was a good thing. And then, of course, as I got older, became more knowledgeable about kind of the history of cannabis, and then got introduced, to differences, normal and different things like that are, actively trying to advocate for legalization, and just learned about kind of how the history went, and got motivated to kind of hopefully work in it. Through my professional life, I was a teacher, then I was a journalist, and then and then I taught middle school. And through that time, I really discovered that I wanted to be a consultant. And through digital marketing prowess and rising up the ranks, I learned how to be a consultant, and was taught by a lot of people who worked in Big Four consulting firms and mentored that way. And I wanted to always bring that to cannabis. And fortunately, a few years back, I was afforded an opportunity to get in. It was a front-facing position I was able to take advantage of, and now here I am professionally working in the industry.
Brian, we heard from Shelby earlier about what she thinks the biggest issues that business owners face in the space. What do you think the biggest challenges are for business owners in cannabis?
Well, there's several. I mean, obviously, just being a business owner, as a lot of you know, is hard. You have to, wear a lot of hats. You have to, you're running really fast. You got to grow revenue. So these are all things that are, difficult for everybody. And on top of that, when you're a cannabis business owner, banking issues. We were referring to taxes earlier, and how they're kind of stacked against your best benefit. Also, interstate commerce is a very difficult issue for business owners, obviously, because not all states are legal, not all states are even medicinal. And then, of course, when in regards to marketing and advertising, you can't really advertise THC brands. Digital platforms are very tentative, and there's a lot of gray area around how and why you can advertise and what types of advertising you can do. And there's a lot of restrictions around it that aren't made very clear to people. And so those are many, many reasons why, especially a cannabis owner, might have a lot of difficulty kind of navigating all these waters.
Brian, tell us how Value Integrators will help.
Well, thank you, Chris. It's mostly decluttering. It's mostly, having a good team of experts with enterprise all the way to startup to enterprise level experience, who have worked in, all sorts of fields, cannabis included, to guide you. It's a metaphor I like to use is like a lot of people, when they get a lot of steam, they get to the point where they're like, oh, I have my core team, man, I'm going to go hire a marketing manager, or I'm going to hire a business development manager because now we're really going to drive sales, right? And generally, when that happens, I always like to say, stop. At that point, perhaps it's now time, since you have a little bit of motor, to hire a firm that can help you basically build all the infrastructure required over the time, and then grow with you and leverage your network and leverage their experience to sort of be a de facto C-suite for you, right? Or an SVP level C-suite type of a play, but also with price points that are acceptable for a startup or for a small or medium-sized business. That's what we offer, is a lot of structure, a lot of guidance, and a lot of doing. That's a lot of things that's one thing I notice in a lot of people talk about a lot of things. And as a strategist, I get called on this all the time, but I actually like to execute. And we have teams that actually do execute and actually do the work. that is required to get you where you go. We don't just talk the talk, we walk the walk.
So, Brian, what are some of your favorite aspects working with cannabis professionals?
Well, there's a lot. One, I like the kind of, and this is generalizing because obviously there's a lot of cannabis professionals out there, but for the most part, very accepting, very welcoming, very willing to partner. It was sort of like Michael was saying earlier, hey, get a hold of us. Everybody wants to talk. That's true. And I'm a big talker myself. I love to help as many people as I possibly can. I think most cannabis professionals tend to be that way. Plus, there's still like we're all in this, together type thing. As our previous guest was talking about, she was saying you kind of have like the best of both worlds. You get your kind of street cred, but you're also bringing in kind of really strong guidance and infrastructure needed to truly scale a business. And then one of the icing on top, of course, for me, with most cannabis professionals, is that we all know that we're doing something that's a lot larger than what we actually do. So yes, I'm a consultant that helps businesses grow, helps cannabis businesses thrive, but we're also all in a position where we can really change the way business is done, period. And a lot of cannabis professionals see this because cannabis, as we all know, is not just about getting high or even just medicinal. It's a lot larger than that. And there's a lot more that we can do. And if a bunch of us can, really stay true to this and try to ingratiate or integrate these kind of not just best practices, but better than best practices into companies, I don't think it's hyperbole to say that we can change the world.
Wild West still, so to speak.
Really
I mean, it is. We're forging new frontiers. So it's a time to set it up and do it right.
It can be stressful being a part of it, but it's actually really exciting being part of it. Well, Brian, thank you so much for joining us. Shelby, thank you for joining us again. Check out our website, thebuddingreport.com. Get contact information for any of our guests, and do reach out if you have business you want to do, questions you want to ask, anything. They'd love to hear from you. Next week's episode will include chef again. Love chefs. Yep. Amanda Jackson and Shia Torby of Restart CBD. So please join us next week, and you have a fantastic week.